we're still in this wrestling match with John Boehner and Mitch McConnell about the last 2 to 3%, where on average we'd be giving them $100,000 for people making $1 million or more.
If this is indeed a wrestling match, it's going to start with some intramurals.
Very nice. Maybe we should talk to Linda McMahon about some wrestling techniques. Top Line starts right now.
Hello and welcome to ABC News Washington Post Top Line. I'm Rick Klein.
And I'm Amy Walter.
Every day at noon Eastern, we're right here bringing you the latest in politics, everything you need to know. It's twitter.com/Rick Klein, twitter.com/Amy E. Walter. Follow us and you'll find out everything on this big election day. Voters voting.
Yay!
We love it, Amy.
One of my favorite days of the entire year.
Indeed.
It's better than Christmas. All right, I'm going to start off with my first Top Line today. Really, we're talking about the battle for the GOP leadership. DeMint v. Palin. Who's going to be the biggest winner tonight in two big primaries, Delaware Senate and New Hampshire Senate? These two Republicans are on opposite sides. In fact, DeMint made what we talked about yesterday as somewhat of a controversial decision to get behind Christine O'Donnell, even as many other folks in Washington have, including many conservatives, have been dismissing her.
And a lot of folks are going to have to own that endorsement. If Palin and DeMint went out on this limb for Christine O'Donnell, if she wins it, they may be among the only folks who are actually actively backing her candidacy. We're not going to hear that from national Republicans. New Hampshire is that other intriguing possibility. You're right. Kelly Ayotte has Sarah Palin's backing, but the Tea Party candidate with Jim DeMint's backing, Ovid LaMontagne.
That's right.
We'll see what the Tea Partiers look like today. Next up, tax cut tweets. We have come to this point in American history where big issues around taxing and spending are all being figured out on Twitter. It started again in the latest round from the press secretary at the White House, Robert Gibbs, who pounced on some of the recent Republican divisions. And he's saying, disarray. Why hold middle-class tax cuts hostage to this? That is what Gibbs looks like when he tweets, by the way.
Yes.
And then came John Boehner back saying Republicans are unified with the ... which is a great way. And then Eric Cantor with the retweet. And now we have, of course, we know absolutely nothing about what's actually going to happen here because we're still seeing divisions on both the Democratic side and the Republican side.
Are we going to get our own bobbleheads?
Yes. Yes,
right.
it's in the works.
I want to start working on that. Anybody want to help out there? All right, next up, nutmeg nosedive. New poll out today from Quinnipiac University shows that the Senate race between Attorney General Dick Blumenthal and Linda McMahon, who I referenced earlier, has gotten a lot tighter. He's leading, but only up 51 to 45%. At one point in this race, he had numbers up in the 60s. The other important number to look at is Obama's job approval rating, all the way down to 45% in Connecticut. Now, the DSCC was quick to send out an email this morning with their own internal polls that showed Obama's numbers better and Blumenthal up by a bigger margin. But the fact remains, this is a lot closer than a lot of Democrats want it to be.
That's right. And this seat, and you added West Virginia to this list, if those seats are in play as well, then the Senate becomes a very real possibility. All of a sudden, it expands the playing field to that extent. And finally today, Fenty's fade. That's the question facing District of Columbia voters, a little local flavor here. But Mayor Fenty, who's actually quite popular for a lot of things he's done here in Washington, is a lot less popular for what he's done with the schools. And it may be this schools issue, particularly his controversial schools chancellor, Michelle Reed, that does him in. Vince Gray running a very strong challenge. We'll get the results today in what's essentially the general election in heavily Democratic District of Columbia. But this is going to be seen as a major referendum on mayors who want to do these aggressive things with schools, actually similar to what President Obama is talking about at the national level.
Well, and in so many cities, major cities, where there's still a race issue here as well. Issues of gentrification and a school system that, quite frankly, a lot of white voters are not as involved in as African-American and other voters in this city.
That's exactly right.
Fascinating.
We begin today up on Capitol Hill with this big tax debate that is looming for members of Congress. Is Congressman Jim Matheson, Democrat of Utah. Sorry to catch you there. I got to be very careful about those labels.
That may help in some parts of that state.
Depending on the year, as you're working on the earpiece.
Yeah.
Are you able to hear us, Congressman?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. So, Congressman, I want to start with this tax debate. What is your view? I know you wrote a letter to the Speaker outlining this, but what do you think should happen with the tax cuts, the Bush tax cuts that are set to expire at the end of the year?
Well, I think based on the fact we're in the worst recession since the Great Depression, that this is not the time for tax rates to be going up for anyone. And so on a temporary basis, 1 year, 2 years, I think we ought to extend all of them and keep going toward economic recovery. There are broader issues out there about the deficit. We've got to deal with them. I'd like to see we do it more in a bipartisan way. But in the short short run, with our economy where it is right now, I don't think we should be raising taxes.
Well, there's a lot of talk about compromise now. Unfortunately, you couldn't see our video of the bobbleheads, but apparently there is a lot of back and forth internally among Republicans and obviously internally among Democrats. Let's just say it right out. If there is a compromise on the table, a tax extension that does not include an extension for the folks making over $200,000 a year, would you vote for that?
You know, the problem there, and I just spent the last 6 or 7 weeks back home for the August recess talking to people throughout the state of Utah, is so many businesses are tied to these rates. So many people have business income as their salary. So this notion that, I know $250,000 sounds like a lot of money for a couple to make if it's income, but if you're a business with 10 or 12 employees, that's not a lot of money. And so we got to be really careful about throwing these numbers out here and there without getting to the details of what do we do to make sure this economy gets going again, because what I hear everywhere I go is that's the number one issue. It's jobs in the economy, jobs in the economy. And so I think we got to be very careful about having tax rates go up on anybody.
Congressman, you know the situation on Capitol Hill, and there's no legislation that's actually forward, but we're hearing from the president, we're hearing from many Democrats saying that Republicans are holding these tax cuts hostage. Is that an accurate characterization? I
think we got to be real careful. Again, this is an election year, so Democrats and Republicans like to bicker with each other, but you know what I know is going on back home? People are tired of that bickering. They really are. I think that's across America. I know that's the case in Utah. They expect people back here to act like big boys and girls and work to do the right thing. And right now, number one on everyone's mind, as I said, it's to get this economy moving and get it growing again.
Is it one party's fault that this hasn't moved?
Oh, I don't think it's one party's fault. I think both parties have had a role to play in this. It's unfortunate we are where we are now. We've created a lot of uncertainty for people because no one knows what's going to happen. And by the way, uncertainty is another problem here. You know, you learn your first year in business school that uncertainty is a cost, it's a risk. We're creating uncertainty across this country by inaction here in Washington. So again, I think both parties have some culpability here, but they're both playing partisan games right now, and that's not what people in America want.
Congressman, does there need to be a vote on this before the election?
Well, I just mentioned earlier that there's this concern about the lack of understanding what's going to happen. People can't make rational decisions when they don't know what the tax structure is going to be. So I think that it should have happened a long time ago, and I think it should have happened sooner than later now because of that.
So if it happens during a lame duck, you think that's too late?
Well, you know, better late than never. I'm just suggesting that, again, the world turns into a pumpkin on this issue December 31. And so how long are you going to wait before December 31 before you say, let's let people know what the playing field is going to look like starting January 1, 2011?
Congressman, I want to take the debate a little bit broader because we saw the president yesterday saying, well, look, we just can't afford this, something like $700 billion for these tax cuts for upper income earners. You're a big deficit hawk. If you don't let these expire, how can you possibly begin to get the budget back into balance?
Okay, first of all, that $700 billion number assumes you make them permanent. I'm just talking about an extension of 1 or 2 years. So the number's actually a lot smaller. And in the longer run, there's no question the deficit issue is something that we have to tackle, and we're going to have to look at everything being on the table. But in the short run, the bigger deficit we got is we got a lack of jobs in this country and a lack of economic growth. And in the short term, I think that's what we ought to focus on.
If you think about where you focus on deficit reduction, ultimately, where does that debate go? You talked about bipartisan getting together on this issue. How does that work, and on what issues do you think you could agree?
Well, you know, first of all, it hasn't been working so far, has it? I think everyone knows that. And, you know, there was an effort to create this bipartisan commission that would have teeth, where the recommendations would have to be voted by Congress. That failed in the Senate last year. I'm very disappointed that happened. Because at the end of the day, I think Congress has to have some structure around it to force these fiscally responsible decisions. But you got to put everything on the table, whether it's the entitlement programs, whether it's every aspect of spending, and where revenues come in. I think all that's got to be on the table, and I think that's what people in America want.
Congress, as you know, the White House said that after Labor Day, there'd be a sharp focus on the economy. We're about a week into seeing that focus. What do you make of the president's messaging? Are you concerned that there's mixed messaging when this tax debate is looming out there, and he's talking about letting them expire for small businesses, as you say? Well,
I think that it's important to focus on the economy because I think that's the number one issue on people's minds, and I think there's actually some good news that's come out recently about where consumer spending has gone, retail spending. I understand the news just came out today that showed a positive movement there. So I think that we ought to be talking about getting this economy going. The tax cut issue is a piece of this bigger dynamic we're involved in right now. I'm sure you're not surprised to notion that sometimes there are some mixed messages out there in the political world. But in this case, I think we ought to focus on what do we do to get this economy back on its feet.
All right. Congressman Jim Matheson, Democrat of Utah, we appreciate you being with us up on Capitol Hill. A fascinating fight to watch play out.